Normally, when you pass a variable as an argument to a function, its original value remains unchanged, and if you want to capture any changes to the value, you need to assign the function's return value to a new variable or reassign it to the existing one. Technically, this is known as passing by value. However, you can also create functions that change the original value using a technique known as passing by reference. It's not used very often, but it's useful to know about. To illustrate the difference, I'm going to begin storing a value as number. Just store the number 2 in that, and then I'll create an ordinary function that passes by value. Call it double it, and the argument that it will take I'll call num. And all this function will do is it will return num times equals 2. So it'll simply double the number and return it. So let's use that function and store the return value in a variable called doubled. And we'll pass it the number that we stored earlier. And view the result using a single quoted string because I want to actually put the literal doubled there rather than the value that it stores. And then we'll show the result and put a HTML BR tag to separate the two lines. Do the same with the original variable, which is passed in as the argument. So let's just save that and view the result in a browser. So you can see that doubled has been doubled to 4, but the original value stored in number is still 2. It remains unchanged. The reason that happens is that when you pass a variable as an argument to a function, the PHP engine makes a copy of the value stored in that variable, and it works on the copy. As a result, the original value stored in the variable remains unchanged. Another point to note about this type of function is that you can pass it an ordinary number. You can pass it a literal number. So if I save that, and the result is 14. Now let's see what happens when I convert this to accept a variable by reference. You do that by preceding the argument by an ampersand. And it doesn't need to return a value, because what is going to happen now is that instead of passing a copy of the variable in, it actually takes a reference to the variable. So it will work on the variable directly. So let's change this back to number. Save and refresh the browser. Now doubled contains nothing, but number is 4, so the value stored in the original variable has now been changed permanently. Let's just see what doubled actually contains by using var dump and passing it to doubled. This tells you what is contained in a variable. Just save that, refresh the browser. Doubled is null, so in other words it contains absolutely nothing. But a really important point to note about passing by reference is that it's storing a reference to a variable. So if I try to pass it a literal number in the same way as I did before and refresh the browser, you'll see what happens. We get a fatal error, and it tells us that only variables can be passed by reference, so you can't pass a literal string or number as an argument to a function that passes by reference. So to create a function that changes the value of a variable, precede the argument you want changed with an ampersand in the function definition. There's no need for the function to return a value because the argument is passed by reference and any changes made by the function affect the original value. However, remember that passing by reference means you can't pass a literal value such as a number or string to the function. Consequently, passing by reference is less flexible than the normal technique of passing by value.